in the woods with Night Danger. I'm at my favorite spot by the creek. The sun is shining, but the mosquitoes haven't come out yet. And life is good. I got a big cigar today because it's a big topic. I suspect it's going to take me a little while to cover all the facets of this, and either you'll bear with me or you'll watch something else. So, I caught a little bit of flack a couple weeks ago for saying that RPGs are not storytelling exercises. And I've gone on about narrativism before, but I'd like to kind of have a definitive, this is the official Night Danger stance on story and RPGs in one place. So here we go. My perspective on the role of story in relation to RPGs is effectively three-pronged. First, storytelling is not the mindset that you should have while actually playing the game. Two, storytelling should not be the language that the mechanics are couched in. And three, stories will emerge as a natural product of the game anyway. So, to be clear, RPGs are not storytelling exercises, but they still produce stories when done correctly and when played correctly. My contention is with the mindset of the people engaging with the game and with the language and language games that make up the rules and mechanics of the game. So, to start with, the inner mindset. As a player, when you sit down to play an RPG, in the same way that I do not think that you should be thinking in terms of mechanics, well, I'll do 3 levels in Warlock and then dip out into Fighter and stack the power like Barbarian. Like, this is an awful way to engage with the game. Trying to simply min-max and win through mechanical loopholes and oversights of the designers is I have no interest in that playstyle. However, the inverse is also true. Playing against type or intentionally taking suboptimal options because you think it will be more dramatic or interesting is also a problem. Because at this point now you're disregarding the world. You're disregarding the internal logic of the game world for storytelling purposes. And what I don't like about this is it takes you out of your character and puts you into the writer's room of the people who made the character. If your game was a television show, are you thinking from the perspective of the character, or are you thinking from the perspective of the 5 or 6 staff who are sitting around a table, sipping coffees, and discussing what would be most interesting for that character to do? One of those is role-playing. And I don't think that you can say that a Hollywood writer's room is engaging in a role-playing game. They are imagining what a character would do, and they are generating stories about that character, but they are not playing a role-playing game. The idea that simply engaging in narrative generation is itself what role-playing is, or collaborative storytelling, is obviously not true, because writers' rooms are not RPGs. But you could probably have a writer's room Braunstein. Anyways, so if a writer's room is not an RPG, why is that? And the answer is that they are not role-playing as a character. When I play Call of Cthulhu, I am pretending to be my character. And this is where, like, your immersion and 4D role-playing guys are going to chime in, or they'll think, yes, exactly. You pretend to be the character, and you imagine what they would do, and you describe the actions as though you are the ones doing them. It shouldn't be what you shouldn't do is say, well, I think that Conan would probably go over and feel around the treasure chest to see if he feels any hitches or mechanisms that might contain a trap. What you should do, and I'm going to speak in normative statements here because this is how I think games should be run. What you should do is say, I feel around the treasure chest and check for any mechanisms. That language distinction, it represents a difference of mindset. Am I telling a story about the character, or am I pretending to be the character? Not the same. They're not the same. And on the side of the game master, and I think most people kind of intuitively understand that. They understand that messing with the rules to create absurd or overpowered outcomes is kind of in violation of the spirit of the game. And they also understand that they should try and think in terms of their character. Players generally are okay at this. At least the people that I've played with are. Where this mindset struggles is with game masters. Game masters are constantly beset by two similar temptations. The temptation to rig the system or rig the scenario mechanically so that it provides a balanced but fair puzzle for the characters to solve, like a combat encounter or a dungeon with various puzzles and traps. You're not making a board game. If you want to do that, make a board game. What you should be doing as a dungeon master is definitely not simply trying to create a fine-tuned mechanical experience. And likewise, a game master, although I don't think game masters are generally tempted to do this, the game master should not be looking for exploits in the rules to punish or be lenient on their players. The referee should be reasonably impartial. And yeah, you shouldn't be thinking in terms of the game system when you're sitting down and running the game. You should know it. You should know the rules. You should follow the rules. But you shouldn't be futzing about with all the little minutia of how the rules work during the session from a balance or a game design perspective. Likewise, you should not be thinking in terms of, obviously, nobody wants, I hope most people are off the railroad train now. They're saying, well, we obviously don't want to railroad the players. But you shouldn't even be thinking in terms of the players do, even if you're just in the proper loop of players act, the world reacts. Players react to the world reaction, the world reacts to their reaction. And that feedback loop, that your cybernetic correction system it's there and it works. But one of the variables when you're course correcting in that feedback loop should not be what is dramatic, what is exciting, what produces a cool arc for this character or that character. Because at that point, A, the temptation to railroad becomes quite strong, but B, it makes the world implausible. It makes it as though the world revolves around the players and what is interesting for them. It makes the world shallow, and it makes the world like the fake McCoys, that Far Side comic where you have like this western town and everyone's just cardboard cutouts and all the buildings are just cardboard cutouts. So, as a game master, if you have narrative as your primary mindset while running the game, you're going to naturally shallow the world. And this is where zero prep can be a really useful exercise, like relying really heavily on random tables or encounter tables and reaction checks to simply generate the session for you live. It's there. I think that's a useful activity simply for the act of breaking your bad habit of trying to write at the table. You are not a writer. You're not an author. You're a referee. You're not a storyteller. If the players are always conveniently finding themselves in the most dramatically appropriate or narratively interesting scenarios, and everything responds in a way that is always building and modulating the tension, it feels fake. I've been in games like this, and it really does start to feel like television, because it loses its plausibility. I know a lot of game masters and a lot of players will complain about things like shopping episodes or sessions where nothing important to the plot happens. But those are essential because they allow, on the player end, they allow the players to simply inhabit their characters in mundane circumstances. It allows you to just go about life as the character, and that deepens the player's connection to the character, and it creates history. It creates precedent of behavior that the player can then use to inform further actions they take as that character in a low-stakes environment. Likewise, on the GM side, it allows the GM to flesh out the world. It allows them to populate it with NPCs who aren't necessarily important to the story, the plot, the arc that everyone's currently in. In other words, it lets you make a world instead of a story. It lets you create a place instead of a script. The idea of like all killer, no filler, constantly ramping up the tension, always looking for the most interesting things to focus on, it cheapens things. So that's point one. The mindset should always simply be, for the players, what would my character do? And for that to actually just guide their actions. And for them to be able to simply pretend to be the character and pretend to be in the world and do things. And not think about, well, wouldn't it be crazy if I betrayed the party right now? Wrong. Oh, it would be so cool if actually this NPC was secretly my father. No. Stop. Don't do that. The game master has the same responsibility, but he is playing the world. He is the world that the players are occupying. And likewise, the world doesn't look at you and say, it would be really symbolic and interesting if this NPC turned out to be your father. Or, it would be really symbolic and interesting if this vital NPC was actually a bad guy, surprise. And you shouldn't be planning twists. You shouldn't be planning arcs, retaliations. You shouldn't be doing things like Pulp Cthulhu, which I do like quite a bit, has this mechanic where the villains, major villains, can sacrifice some of their luck points to not be killed by a player action because a minion says, "No, I'll save you, master," and dives in front of the bullet or whatever. That's awful. And the reason it's awful is because it's an artificial narrative conceit. It breaks the internal logic of the world. If a minion was to sacrifice himself to save the villain, this is something that should have been declared or planned as an action that the minion took, not as a metacurrency-based power that the villain had. The minion, based on his morale score, based on his position in relation to the villain, based on how he feels, his loyalty to his master. And of course, AD&D has all these things. It has loyalty. It has morale. Based on those variables, he might decide, I'm going to try and be between the heroes and my master. That's his action this turn. And depending on his initiative and where he falls in the flow of actions, maybe he succeeds and maybe he doesn't. And it's the same outcome. The minion saves the villain's life. But how it's executed is actually consistent with the world and not simply a conceit that the GM implemented to up the drama. A final example I'll pull is in another Call of Cthulhu example, and Alexander Macris brings this up in his Arbiter World series, which you should watch on YouTube. It's very good. In the Arbiter Worlds video, he talks about you're stealing an ancient grimoire from a library, and you stuff it under your shirt, and you try to sneak out the library, and then the GM says, well, the book has an RFID chip, and it sounds the alarm, and the guards are coming, and roll initiative. We're in combat. This sucks, because it breaks the internal logic of the world. 1920s New England academic institutions didn't have RFID chips. They didn't have wireless alarms. But the book starting to seep blood through the shirt or let out an ungodly scream from like a fold of skin in the binding that then alerts the guards, and now they're trying to detain you and roll for initiative. It's combat. It's the same outcome, but it's consistent with the world. And of course, my additional caveat is you should only do this if you have established ahead of time, before they attempted to steal the book, probably before they even knew about the book. You should establish that the book will do that. Because again, you're not trying to simply ramp up the tension or pull secret cards out from up your sleeve to get the players into interesting scenarios. The characters will get into interesting scenarios all by themselves if you simply play the world plausibly and respond proportionately to their activities. Because the players don't want to just sit around and do nothing and like live normal mundane lives. So they're naturally going to put themselves in interesting situations. You don't need to contrive these. Bringing us to the second point. Narrative should not be the language of the mechanics. And what I mean by this is, let's say you have a table that will determine the response of an NPC to a player action. There's kind of two ways you could go about this. The way that I would endorse would be this NPC has an intelligence rating, maybe a morale, an alignment. Alignment is a huge one here. He's got a system of beliefs. He's got an inner mind. He's a character. And the NPC will then respond to what the players do simply according to those principles. Maybe you check his morale, and that's modified by what the players do. Maybe it's maybe the players have a bonus. Maybe they greatly outnumber the NPC, and so there's a negative modifier on his morale check or whatever. But the response and the mechanics that dictate that response are all operating from the perspective of the world. Contrast this with a response from, say, one of the I think it's Carved from Brindlewood. It's a Powered by the Apocalypse derivative system for mysteries, and a lot of them will feature a response like, if the players... Oh, he's going to crinkle right in front of the camera. Noisy mutt. So, where was I? Lost my train of thought here. Yes. So, the conceit of a Carved from Brindlewood action, it might be, if the player's roll fails, the GM should have a response or the failure based on what would be the scariest possible outcome right now. If it's a horror game, or if it was a humor game, what would the funniest possible outcome be? Or what would be dramatic or interesting in response to this? And the GM is explicitly intended to think in terms of what would be dramatic. And the players are too when they actually create the characters. They are told to create characters whose character traits will produce drama. And I really think that couching the mechanics in this way cheats the players and the game master out of the joy of truly emergent story, truly emergent happenings. Because if you follow this kind of logic, it means that maybe even from the point of character creation, you kind of already know what's going to happen to the character. The character is he's going to have a redemption arc. He's troubled and he's trying to get better. And so this game is going to be about him finding redemption. Or this game is about him getting worse. Or this is about him reconnecting with his family. You've decided what's going to happen before it has actually happened. And it's not necessarily a railroad, because it could take any number of paths along this way, and they might succeed or fail on this path. But you're still not thinking in terms of the world. You're thinking in terms of the plot. You're a reader or a writer. You're an audience or an author, but you're not a character. You're not a world. And if the game is done well, the mechanics will simply incentivize particular types of drama on their own without any planning. And there's a great example of this. There's a blog post. The blog has chocolate in the title. And it's Boot Hill and Boot Hill and the Fear of Dice. And he talks about this game of Boot Hill that he ran. And Boot Hill has almost no mechanics at all. It's basically just a skirmish war game. It's really just about... it's really just a game that's about shooting. And when you play that as an RPG, it means that the players are drawn to violence. Because as far as what's on their character sheet, that's really kind of the only thing that the game will tell you how to do. Everything else is freeform. I know there's gambling rules too, but that's besides the point. The point is, if there's rules for gunfighting on the character sheet, the players are going to want to gunfight. You don't have to tell them to. You don't have to tell them to think of a reason for why their character wants to gunfight. You don't have to tell them to think on their background of why they're attracted to violence. They will simply want to engage in violence because that's what the game says that it's about. That's what the game tells you it's about. But the other thing about Boot Hill is that combat is really deadly. It's winning and surviving 3 gunfights is a big deal. And this, in the blog post, he talks about how these 2 variables naturally created a really tense and interesting political drama, political intrigue, because the players naturally want to enter into conflicts with NPCs, but also don't want to die. And so there's all this maneuvering and, well, we're going to try and ambush them, or we're going to try and make sure we outnumber them, or we're going to make sure that we don't piss them off, because if we piss them off, they're going to show up with 12 dudes with shotguns and blow us all away. And those simple two truths, all you have to worry about is combat, and combat will probably kill you, just naturally produced an interesting and exciting and engaging drama and narrative. At no point did the rules have to tell you to engage in narrative. At no point did the players have to think in terms of narrative. This is the third point. This is my third prong. If the game is designed well, interesting stories will happen anyway. You can't stop it. In fact, if you really get it going well, you might even want to try to stop it. You might want to pump the brakes and slow it down, and oh gosh, there's so much going on and I can't keep up with it all. And the players are up to so many different things, and there's the factions of the world are spinning and spiraling out of control. A great example of this would be the Shuckdoister module by Black Lodge Games. In like 4 or 5 sessions, the world just blew up. There was so much going on, just from having believable factions with real motivations and characters with believable motivations. The players simply doing what their characters would do, and the world simply doing what the world would do as established prior to sitting down at the table. And story just happens. This is why I think RPGs are not storytelling exercises, because you sit down and you play with your friends, and it's give and take and push and pull, and a story will come out at the other end. But at no point do you need to think about it like that. And in fact, it's more exciting and dynamic and interesting when you don't. RPGs are role-playing games. They're not storytelling games. They are role-playing games. And when you role-play, you get story after the fact. And you can't cop out and say, well, but if it produces a story, then it's a storytelling exercise. Because by that logic, all human activity is a storytelling exercise. When I play chess with my son, we're not sitting down thinking, let's tell a story. But a story is going to happen. In fact, multiple stories are going to happen. The story of who won the game of chess. Probably me. He's 4 years old. The story from my end of how was I pulling my punches to keep from winning too quickly and discouraging him. And the story of how I'm in the process of teaching him the game. Well, if you move your piece there, you're going to put yourself in danger and you're going to lose that piece. So maybe you want to try a different move. That's my story. And it has ups and downs and twists and turns. And then there's his story of both learning the game, of spending time with his dad, and also, because he's 4, there actually is an imaginative role-playing story happening for him. Because he thinks, oh, my queen is scared because she's in danger. I need to move her so that she'll feel better. That's how he thinks about the game right now. He's engaging in imaginative play. But he's also not... what we're doing collectively is still not playing a role-playing game. We're playing chess. And this is where the distinction is. A role-playing game requires everyone involved to be role-playing, and that includes the game master. This is the biggest hitch. If some of the people at the table are role-playing and others are not, it is not a role-playing game. Because otherwise, literally everything I do with my kids at all times would be a role-playing game. They're very imaginative. They spend a lot of time up here seeing and thinking and pretending while going about their day-to-day doing all kinds of other stuff. I think I've made my point. I think I've got my point across. I could belabor with like 6 other examples of non-RPG human activities that still produce stories and potentially incorporate elements of imagination. But between the writer's room example and the chess game example, I think it's clear that a collaborative endeavor that involves imagination and produces a story is still not a role-playing game. So, that being said, I think I'll just sign off here. It's a lovely day. I hope you are able to get outside maybe. If you're watching this at night, maybe check the time. It might be time for you to go to bed. Well, God bless you all.